Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our leadership session. I wanted to introduce our guest speaker today, Stephanie Thum. Welcome to our program, and thank you for allowing us and sharing your knowledge with us. So I'll kick off by giving a quick bio about Stephanie. So Stephanie is a PhD student at Indiana Tech. She has more than 25 years of business experience and was one of the US federal government's first agency level customer experience leader during Obama administration. During that time, she also advised the president's task force on customer experience. She is a certified customer experience professional and currently owns her own consultancy, Practical Customer Experience. So welcome, and thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. I want to kick off the session today by talking about what the session is going to be about. So the session title today is going to be Leadership and the Red Tape Menace to Employee Engagement. All right. The session description is any customer who has ever been waiting in line at DMV to renew their driver's license. That will be me. Fill out the forms at the hospital when we go to the doctor's office and understanding what it means to navigate the administrative red tapes. But red tapes has a compounded impact on employees' engagement. In this session, we will define red tape, discuss how red tape impact employee engagement, and explore leadership point of debate about clearing away red tape. So thank you and welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amin. Hi, everybody. So I want to start off the presentation. If I can just get my slides to advance here, bear with me. I want to start off my presentation with a story. I have a friend, her name is Wendy, and she works in digital customer experience for the city of Auckland, New Zealand. And a few years ago, when Wendy and her team got the chance to slash some red tape for the employees and the citizens of the city of Auckland, they dove at the problem like champs. Now, back then, if you as a citizen wanted to report something as simple as, say, a broken public park bench to the city, or a broken water fountain, or an overflowing trash bin, you had to call a government contact center, send a message via a generic government email address, or go see someone at a government office in person. That interaction set off a 55-step paper-based manual business process for the city's contact center employees, the middle office coordinators, and the contracted maintenance employees. And if you as a citizen wanted to check on the status of a repair that you reported, you had to call a government contact center and sit and wait on hold while a representative accessed an Excel spreadsheet to find the answer to your question. It was a classic example of government red tape that cost a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of headaches. It was cumbersome, inefficient, and when I tell you how many of these they were processing each year, you will get the picture. Auckland has more than 200,000 of these city assets like park benches and water fountains and trash bins. And city employees were processing 150,000 of these transactions per year. So employees, as you might imagine, were stressed out and overwhelmed. They needed a more efficient, less burdensome way to do their jobs. And meanwhile, citizens would complain to their local elected officials if it seemed like the repairs weren't moving fast enough. And that work actually ripples back to city employees. But after Wendy and her team got finished with about 2 years worth of work, there were 50 people working for about 2 years. They had streamlined that 55-step process, that paper-based manual process, into a 10-step mostly automated process. They launched a new smartphone app that let citizens immediately on the spot upload pictures whenever they saw a problem and create a report that immediately went to the city. And behind the scenes, through technology, those photos and the reports of stuff that was wrong went straight to the right maintenance contractor, which bypassed the need for a citizen to even need to call a contact center at all. So Wendy's team estimates that this work is going to save about 150,000 calls per year into their contact center. It was a huge win for cutting red tape and for giving citizens faster digital access to their local government and for reducing job stress for employees. So I want to ask the audience, what do you think of? Put it in the chat for me. When I say the words red tape, or you hear the words red tape, what are some words that come to mind? Put it in the chat for me. And Amin is going to read some of what your words are when you think of this term red tape. Amin, what are we seeing so far? Anything?
I would say, filling out some forms every person has in the household, like all the applications. I put in government. When you talk about red tape, I equal that to government. Let's see.
Right. And red tape is native to the public sector, but it is not exclusive to it.
No, it does not. It does not.
Anything else in the chat function
Nope.
about what people think of? Okay. All right.
Just getting the runaround, right?
Yes.
Taking the human interaction out.
Definitely. All right, thank you. Well, today, red tape is really a metaphorical term, and its origins date back hundreds of years to the governments of England and Spain. Some say even longer than that, to the earliest governments in China, but basically for as long as governments have existed. Now, red tape refers to the red ribbon that was used to bind important time-sensitive administrative documents and legal decisions from the king or the queen to his or her subjects. And recipients of those documents then spend a lot of time trying to untie that ribbon, only to discover that their request had been denied for what they felt like was no good reason. So think about it as getting the runaround, as someone said, medieval style. Well, today, red tape is about long, incomprehensible processes, unnecessary rules, procedures, policies, administrative delays, paperwork, and administrative burden. As we mentioned a minute ago, it can be considered native to the public sector, but it is not exclusive to the public sector. Red tape comes from inside organizations themselves. It can come from lawmakers, regulators, special interest groups that want to influence how organizations operate. Some of the words that have been used in the scholarly literature to describe red tape are on this slide, actually. Menace, nuisance, no redeeming social value, friction, sludge, and this is a term we're going to hear more about, sludge, hassles, and frustration. Why is that? Well, that's because the time, the effort, and the materials that are associated with complying with red tape can be very expensive, monetarily, psychologically, physiologically, and time-wise. This is where we start to connect red tape and customer experience first. Now, it has been argued that red tape hits customers the hardest. If you've ever had to fill out an application for federal student aid, right? Or tried to figure out the documents that you need to get a new driver's license at the DMV, or if you've ever had to help someone maybe apply for unemployment insurance, or you tried to get an incorrect hospital bill fixed, you may already understand the frustrations of red tape. Red tape has a compounded impact on employee experience and employee engagement too, because not only do employees routinely administer rules and paperwork and processes that customers have to navigate, but employees also have to navigate red tape of their own, like, let's say, rigid hierarchy, long approvals processes to get the materials that you need to do a job, rules that make it hard to get a promotion, processes that make it hard for employees to get reimbursed for travel expenses, and rules that make it difficult for mid-level managers to hire and fire. So I want to share with you what the research tells us about the impact and what the impact is on employees' experiences from all of that. All of this is in the scholarly literature. I got a long list for you. Research has shown that too many rules can lead to cognitive uncertainty and rule-bending behavior for employees, reduced communication intention with supervisors. It can lead to employees deliberately working against leadership. In government, it's referred to as guerrilla government. attrition, employee stress, mistakes from being overburdened, inhibited innovation and motivation, feelings of powerlessness and alienation, slowed productivity and job dissatisfaction, and lowered change support intentions. That's a pretty long list, but all of these things have shown up in the academic literature and the scholarly literature as being connected to the administrative burden of bureaucratic red tape. And it's easy to see how these things are red flags for employee experience, but when you think about it and the ripple impact that it can have on an organization, there are potential political risks for your company too. For me, reduced change support intention is a biggie. We're all facing change all of the time. And if red tape stands in the way of employees, if they perceive it to be in their way or on their mind first, they're less likely to support change. So I want to share with you some of the reasons why I decided to study red tape, because this is one of my areas of interest as part of my own PhD work. I decided to study red tape for a couple of reasons. The first is, as part of my PhD coursework, I spent about the past year or so studying global leadership and customer-focused organizational change. There is a movement to improve customer experiences everywhere, in private sector and government, nonprofit organizations. And as I've studied these subjects, it's become really difficult to ignore the importance of engaged employees in that movement. But red tape continuously shows up in the literature as being a barrier to creating the change that's necessary to create these customer-focused organizations. And organizational leaders show little signs of retreating from it. It's expensive, red tape is time-consuming, and that really doesn't seem to match with leaders' responsibilities to create efficient, change-ready organizations. And the scholarly world hasn't really connected leadership and red tape, and without that link, there's an important piece missing. The second reason is because of my own professional background, as Amin mentioned in the introduction. During my time leading customer experience, working in leadership as part of the senior leadership team for a federal government agency, I experienced firsthand the impact of red tape on the agency's customers and employees, like creating more forms on fields, more fields on forms, sorry about that, ever-changing rules, long wait times to get decisions, growing piles of rules and documentation that were piled on employees and the customers. But it was written in our strategic plan, our public-facing strategic plan, that we were going to reduce those burdens because it was thought that there would be a benefit to employees and customers. But as part of my agency's senior leadership team, unfortunately, I also witnessed the creation of red tape and executive pushback to doing anything about it. But now, several years have passed, and that customer experience movement is maturing in government and in private industry as well. But it takes leaders and employees to get that change happening. Red tape is starting to show up as that proverbial elephant in the room for employees. Or as a friend of mine recently said, you mean like a herd of elephants in the room? And that's really what it is. Now, since the studies have shown that red tape is a problem for employees, you might automatically assume that it's an automatic problem for leaders, but it's really not as simple as that. And I think this is one of the most important points to understand, because you might think, well, we'll just go and take care of that. Red tape, we can eliminate that, no problem. But red tape isn't always harmful. There's no way to run a business without rules and processes. There's no way to run a government agency without rules and processes. It's actually written into law about rules and processes in a lot of instances. And some employees actually prefer the structure of red tape. For example, there was a study done in Ghana of public sector records management employees, and 50.3% of employees said that bureaucracy and red tape had a negative impact on job satisfaction. 49.7% said it had a positive impact. So split almost right down the middle. Some people like it, some people don't like it. Not everybody agrees that it's a bad thing. And sometimes red tape can serve legitimate purposes, like providing structure for programs, preserving program integrity, and of course, the classic repelling of cheaters and fraud. These are just a handful of the arguments that you'll run into. There are plenty more, like red tape is just prime fodder for the bandwagon effect. It's people not getting what they want when they want it. You'll see this in some of the scholarly literature too. I think as a practitioner, understanding these sources of debate about red tape can help you understand why most organizations and their leaders show little signs of retreating from administrative burden. It's been called an unglamorous management battle. Like it or not, red tape burdens and sludge do color people's experiences. And knowing the landscape now, how do you find a way forward? Because we can't just come and say, we got this problem and lay it at people's feet and just expect someone else to solve it for us. There is an irrefutable point to be made that the onus is on leaders to lead change and create high-performing, efficient organizations. And they have to make decisions that contribute to employee satisfaction and retention. So where do you start building a case for addressing red tape and employee experiences or customer experiences? Well, the first suggestion is to measure employee perceptions of red tape. Take a poll. There's also a validated, academically validated by Dr. Nina Van Loon and her colleagues. They created a measurement scale that concentrates on how employees perceive red tape rules in their work. There's a separate scale as well for how employees perceive red tape in their organization. A sludge audit. This is a new and emerging technique that can help you evaluate how much time employees are being asked to spend on filling out those forms and providing documentation and waiting for decisions and repeating processes. Sludge audits, and this is one thing I really like about sludge audits, they can also help you get a dollar cost of all that time being spent on complying with red tape. Streamlining business processes is another classic suggestion. And in the case of Auckland, which I shared at the beginning of this presentation, the business processes they streamlined touched customers and employees. So simply being mindful as well of piling rules on top of rules is another suggestion. Sludge isn't always easy to detect, and administrative burden and red tape isn't always easy to detect because there's an empathy gap between the people who design the rules most of the time and the processes and the people who actually have to use them or live through them. So in this presentation, we have covered the definition, the detriments, and the debates surrounding bureaucratic red tape. But I just want to be sure to leave the audience with some positivity straight from the scholarly literature, and that is this. Bureaucratic red tape may not necessarily be a bad thing if it motivates you to innovate your processes. That may be a good middle ground for you if you're going to open up a dialogue with your leadership team about the impact of red tape on employees. That was the case for my friend Wendy in the city of Auckland. So thank you so much for letting me talk about this topic. And I want to share with you my resources, my references. I've got a lot of them. This actually isn't all of everything that I have on employee experience and red tape, but this is everything that was referred to in this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. So typically at this time, I would ask anyone if there are questions. If you're watching this recorded and you would love to put a comment in the comment section of the LinkedIn or wherever you're watching this, we'll check those and make sure we get those answered for you. Or you can reach out to your friendly ALP board member and we will get you connected with that answer. So there is one question that was put into the chat. Stephanie, what was your biggest learning in doing this research?
The biggest learning in doing this research was that I needed to separate myself from my own personal feelings about administrative red tape and bureaucratic red tape. I started looking into the positive of red tape, and I was actually challenged to do that through a peer reviewer when I submitted a business case study that's going on this same topic that's going to be published in on Sage Business Cases in January. And this peer reviewer really challenged me to dig into the positives of administrative red tape, that structure, that cognitive certainty, and really to take a more holistic viewpoint as a pracademic in what this actually means and what it entails for employees. And that really helped me a lot to kind of separate from my own personal feelings and look at the research holistically.
And then the other question was, what do you suggest people do who want to eliminate red tape but aren't the decision makers?
Well, just like in my experience, just like with any other initiative or idea, you have to keep pounding the drum, right? You have to start a dialogue. You have to have conversations internally. When it comes to making organizational change, you may not look at yourself as being the leader right away, but when you step up and make the suggestions and make the business case and build the business case, I will tell you that these kinds of changes require tremendous tenacity. In my practical experience doing this work in a federal government agency years ago, it took years to actually get people to sit up and take notice. It took continuous conversations and those gentle nudges along the way. So start a conversation, have tenacity, and just continue to beat the drum and bring people with you, those early adopters, to continue that conversation. Put the business case together and suggest the solutions and how much they're going to cost and how much they're going to save. This is where we could talk a little bit more about sludge audits if you want to. Okay,
Yeah, sure.
so in my presentation, we talked about sludge audits. Now, when you're building out the business case for doing this kind of work, one of the biggest barriers can oftentimes be a CFO, right? Because they want to know how much it's going to cost. They want to know how much it's going to save, what's going to be in it financially for the organization. Up until recently, in customer and employee experience, we've really only had kind of soft ways of making those connections, right? But there's this concept that's emerging now called a sludge audit. And it takes you from knowing that something is wrong to actually doing a thing, and it puts a dollar value on it. What you do is you take a look at the time that employees are spending on tasks, and you add up all that time, maybe find a dollar value as to how much employees are making per hour, and then do the simple math. We can do a little bit of simple math right now, actually. So I mentioned that Wendy in the city of Auckland, they are going to save, I'm getting my calculator out here, they are going to save about 150,000 calls per year into their contact center, right? So let's assume that a contact center call takes about 15 minutes. So we'll take 150,000 calls times 15 minutes equals 2,250,000 minutes of time. Let's assume the average cost of a contact center call is anywhere between 75 cents and $1 a minute, right? So let's just say a dollar for every minute. You're looking at $2,250,000 worth of potential cost avoidance for something like that. That's very basic. Sludge audits are more complex than that, but that's the basic idea. So if you're building a business case, think about how you can attach a dollar value, because they always want to know about the ROI.
That was very helpful. Thank you, Stephanie. I loved how you pointed out that some people love rules and some don't. I think that's an important concept to point out, that not everyone thinks red tape is a bad thing. And even too many rules can cause uncertainty, which almost seems like an oxymoron. Like you would think if you had a rule or a process for every step, that would kind of outline a path. But I agree with you, and I love that you pointed that out. My question would be, if you have, like, say you've taken your first step and you've measured the employee perceptions of red tape, and most employees would agree that less red tape would work better for them. How do you reassure those people who were relying on that red tape and felt more comfortable with it?
Well, it has to be a collaborative process in coming to that decision, and it has to be continuously communicated, and you have to stay on the pulse of what everyone thinks. That communication and that collaboration on why certain things matter to different people and why they don't matter to other people, that's important to kind of keep that holistic picture in a dialogue.
Yeah, I love that.
And I would say the example you shared about um, the experience in, is it Auckland?
Auckland, New Zealand, yes.
Auckland, yes. So I live in Milpitas, and we have something similar. They started maybe a couple of years ago. We were having a lot of pothole issue, lights out, and we used to do the same thing. We would send a letter or email, and it took forever. Now, what residents did was they started putting stuff on Twitter, right? Twitter, Nextdoor, social media, and then the city decided, you know what? We'll get a one consolidated spot. So they did a City of Milpitas app, and so you can report issue and you can select from the drop down. Okay, this is the issue here. Take a picture, send it to it, and they're very quick about within 24 business hours, someone takes care of it, and they'll respond and let you know, hey, we're working on this area, or thank you, we got it. We may need about a couple more weeks because it's on project to work on.
That
So
is, that is such a great example. And think about on their side, how much easier it is for their own employees and how, because of that, their employees can maybe focus on some different work or maybe, a different value of work as a result of doing that. That's such a great
yeah,
example.
I mean, it's a small town, so it's like, well, I can't say in small town. It's about 120,000 people, but we still know a lot. I mean, people have grown up here. I mean, I've been here for the last 27 years, so I mean, I know the mayor, I know all the council people. So I mean, I can pick up a call and call them and say, hey, what are you doing? Fix this. I voted for you. You got to do your part, right? But the reality is the mayor is not the one who's going to come out and fix it. It has to be the city employee. So I mean, it definitely helps to know people, but also making the process easier. I think it made a lot easier process. So when there's complaint, people just take a picture, post it, and if someone takes care of it. I mean, we know
Yes.
that it because the experience has been that it has been taken care of. I mean, it may take more than a day or maybe a week, but it gets taken care of. So it definitely helps.
That is such a great example. Thank you.
And just to add to the red tape, I know we talk about rules. Um, I like rules, or I like the processes. Like I like the step-by-step process. And I know sometimes it feels like it's a red tape that we have to follow step 1 to step 2 to step 3 to step 10. But sometimes it's a good thing. It's not always a bad thing to follow the rules. But also is that some people like the rules. Some people want to be in that structure and they don't want that gray area. It's like, oh, I can either do this or don't do this, but it's a gray area. So am I gonna get in trouble if I did it the wrong way, or if the way you don't like it, or if you don't agree, or another manager comes in? So yeah, so it's very important to get the employees get engaged to kind of have the rule. I mean, in my current job, we were whatever changes we make, we discuss the change with our team first and say, hey, this is how it's gonna look like. What are your thoughts? Do you think this is going to work? What can we tweak? How can we fix it? And team is always open to providing suggestion because then it comes from their perspective and they're like, hey, we participated in the change happening, so they are more, they want to participate, they want to take care of the change because it's a good change. So that's part of the change management. We kind of teach our team, hey, be part of the solution. You don't have to be the one always complaining. You can fix this. You can bring up the idea. So
Yeah. It's hard work. The red tape reduction can be very hard work because a lot of times these rules are written as laws or policies that have to go through red tape of their own to be adjusted. So, and a lot of times, what the research shows as well is oftentimes rules breed rules. For example, if you have the White House that sends out a new set of rules to executive branch, federal government agencies, well, then that sets off a whole new in a cascade effect set of rules that each agency might unroll in their own agencies that is all different from each other. And then, and on and on. So you have to be really careful about those rules breeding rules. And I think one of the most basic things is just to be mindful of how many rules you're asking employees to follow. And remember that empathy gap that exists. leaders oftentimes create rules and they don't have to live through them. And I think that, there can be some basic things that can be done to understand with an empathetic heart what you're asking employees to do. And it's so important, especially from a leader's perspective, because you're responsible for maintaining efficient organizations. It costs a lot to replace those employees.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
So we are at time. I think we could talk about this for another hour, because definitely like a lot of chain reaction things came to mind as you were talking. But I do want to thank you, Stephanie, for taking the time to meet with us, to go over red tape and how it impacts not only the customer, but the employee, and the steps that we can take to kind of gauge and remove it if possible. So thank you so much for meeting with us today.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. I had fun.
Thank you. This was great. Thank you so much.
This was great. I do want to remind everybody that we do continue this leadership speaker series on the last Thursday of each month. So be sure to check back next month for our next speaker.